I would like to introduce our survey and student research assistants from the California State University Monterey Bay, Christopher Shatto and Ahtziri Carranza Medrano, and they were led by Dr. Victoria Derr. So can I invite Chris and Ahtziri on?
Hi there. I want to thank all those involved for giving us a chance to present this very important research to all of you, and thank all of you for taking the time to join us during the Climate of Hope Forum here. It shows that you do care, and it empowers us to talk onto this platform here. So my partner Ahtziri and I will be presenting A Farming Future, analysis of local farmer views of climate change in Pajaro Valley, done in partnership with the nonprofit Regeneración and with support from the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Center at CSUMB. I want to first start by giving you some background as to why this research was carried out in the first place. And this is due to the growing separation between planning for agriculture and planning for the community that supports it in the midst of climate change. To this point, California has primarily taken an ecological approach in the agriculture sector by focusing on things like water management, soil structure, carbon emissions, and sequestration, but has yet to address things like labor, health, or vulnerable populations in agriculture and any of their climate-smart agriculture programs. On the other side of things, California has taken a risk-based approach in climate adaptation planning, which do include vulnerabilities, but lack the guidance for planning or acknowledging health in an agricultural context. Within these adaptation planning guidelines, vulnerability indicators have yet to include farm workers or agricultural workers at all. In fact, in the measure SB 379, which is a land use measure, agriculture is only mentioned in the development of the general plan. So while some have advocated particular attention to farm workers or agricultural workers as a vulnerable population, explicit connections within any planning has yet to be made. So while both of these approaches have proven useful and certainly a step in the right direction, they both clearly work independent from one another. So our goal is to link the entire agricultural community, from farmers, farm workers, to the community at large by conducting a community survey and a farmer survey to not only understand the perceptions of both these groups, but to simultaneously establish an inherent connection between the two as an agricultural community. And Ahtziri now will give you some more background as to how those two surveys were carried out.
Hello, so in 2017, Regeneración constructed a community-based survey that focused on understanding the community's experiences with environmental changes in order to help identify local concerns and also areas for action. Instead of focusing on whether people knew what climate change was, they decided to focus on people's lived experiences, as people tend to have different levels of knowledge or opinions regarding the subject. The community survey garnered a total of 324 usable responses, which came from both paper and online formats of the survey. Now, for this survey in particular, if you're interested in reading about all the results from the survey, then you can head over to Regeneración's website, as they already published a paper detailing the results. In 2019, a second survey was conducted in which farmers were the target respondents. This is because Regeneración wanted to have a better look at how agriculture, which is a big part of our community, was being affected, to see what types of action should be taken, and to identify any points of overlap between the two groups. This was a first attempt to reach out to the farmers themselves. We tried through multiple networks and outlets to get participation, and at the end received 5 participants. We do not suggest that these views are reflective of the approximately 80 farmers in the Pajaro Valley, but we hope that the perspectives we do share stimulate a conversation about trends we see, particularly in connection to the community and farm workers, and hope that this presentation will spur more interest and participation. For both these surveys, there were 3 types of question used, which were check all that apply, 1 through 5 scale ranking questions, and open-ended questions to allow respondents to elaborate more on their responses. Next slide. Thank you. So I'll be starting off by giving a brief overview of the results from the community survey. This first slide is going over the changes community members have noticed in the Pajaro Valley due to climate change. The top 3 responses were more days with high temperature, heat waves during autumn or winter, and more frequent droughts. Interestingly though, if you look at the highest 2 responses on the graph, there's actually only a 1% difference between the top 2 answers. That signifies that increased heat in general is a noticeable change within the valley. Next slide. And of course, this heat increase affects us all, especially since we're not used to high temperatures in the Pajaro Valley. However, agricultural workers are the most affected by this. 74% of the people who identify as agricultural workers reported that they themselves or others who work in the fields are affected by extreme heat at the workplace. Next slide, please. Oh. Okay, and aside from asking what changes they have seen, community members were also asked about which pollutants have been affecting them the most. Litter came in first place as 62% of respondents indicated that it affects them. Pesticides came in second place, car smog came in third, and water contamination came in fourth place. This data helps demonstrate the various concerns of community members, which in turn helps influence the type of initiatives they are interested in. And lastly, here we have interest in initiatives. On a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being least helpful and 5 being extremely helpful, respondents were asked which one of these initiatives they believe were the most helpful in reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that are being released into the atmosphere. The top response was having more access to organic agriculture. There was also an interest in having safer sidewalks and bike lanes in order to encourage others in using those forms of transportation. A lot of people also mentioned that putting in place these initiatives wasn't enough, that if we truly wanted to see change, then we would also need to encourage behavioral changes within the community.
The farmer survey consisted of 59 questions, 36 of which were Likert scale responses, similar to the one Ahtziri mentioned, rated on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being of least concern or least helpful, and 5 being most concern or most helpful. The questions can be broadly categorized into 3 sections. Experiences a change in the weather, so temperature, extreme weather events, or other climate-related experiences. Effects of change on production, which includes crops, labor, health, and other farmer feasibilities. And interest in initiatives, which not only includes adaptation strategies farmers can do on their own farms, or even more community-based strategies, but also shows how farmers more broadly view climate change impacting the society and their ability to sustain their farm over the next 5 and 20 years. So with this in mind, the most common experiences of change all pertain to the heat, as heat waves, high temperatures, wildfire smoke, and frequent droughts were the highest scored responses, followed by unpredictability, which certainly includes the heat, but was mostly asked in regard to precipitation. Farmers had less experience with sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, and frequent flooding. And this could just be due to the geographical location of the farmers, sitting well above sea level, or just having yet to experience any water contamination via saltwater intrusion in their wells. Next, we have effects on farming operations, which you can see here that this section didn't merit as high of scores as the first, but you can also quickly see that there is a correlation between damaged crops and work stoppages, as they both sit atop this graph here. And this makes some sense because when a crop is ready to be harvested, but workers aren't able to harvest it due to the weather and not being able to work, the crop is still left on the field to wilt, to burn, or to suffer other losses in quality. Farmers were less affected by power outages or worker health and flooding. And worker health stood out as a low score because it was lower than we anticipated, given the context of the study. But we had to remind ourselves that this is what farmers have experienced up until now, and it may be indicative of low heat illness numbers, exhaustion, or other heat-related health issues. But later on, we'll see how farm worker protection is certainly an interest and concern for farmers. But before that, we put these three questions together because we felt that they were more related to one another than they had to do with actual farming operations, because they go beyond the farm and show us more broadly how farmers view climate change impacting society and their ability to sustain their farm over the next 5 and 20 years. Societal impacts of climate change was unanimously the highest scored question in the entire survey at 4.8. This is followed here by their 20-year outlook of sustaining their farm. And lastly, their 5-year outlook, which is scored just above neutral. And this is interesting to look at because it shows that though farmers aren't experiencing extreme change on their farms right now, it shows that they're experiencing enough to know that things are only going to get worse in the future for themselves to sustain their farm and for society at large. And this may help to assess their interest in one or another initiative on the following slide, where rainwater capture, farm worker protection, funding to replace spray with drip irrigation, and information on carbon reduction were the highest scored questions. And though these four may seem rather distinct from one another, besides maybe rainwater capture and funding to replace spray with drip irrigation, as these both pertain to water, which in the context of heat, water is crucial, farm worker protection also pertains to the heat as well, since that's the main thing we're seeking to protect farm workers from. So one can make the case that the top three scored responses here are all in response to increasing heat. And I want to take a moment to explain information on carbon reductions, because as we know, information isn't just a set of guidelines or a set of how to do something on your farm, but also reflects guidance and the ability to have an example to follow or a role model, so to speak, and not just being told that this is how to reduce carbon emissions on your farm. Farmers were less interested in things like insurance, ranging all the way up to local policy for local distribution. And I starred both of these in particular because I want to show you later on how Likert scale responses sometimes don't always tell the whole story of how all farmers feel. But before I do that, I want to show you how we compiled all of our open-ended responses into a data analytics tool to measure the frequency of how often farmers mentioned one or another concern or interest in their open-ended responses. And we found that worker support was most often mentioned, especially in regards to farm worker health and payment on days of poor air quality, high heat, rainy days, and days that farm workers can't work due to the weather. This is followed closely by rainwater capture, or the topic of water, I should say, which includes rainwater capture and irrigation. And this correlates well to what farmers were interested in on the last page, as nearly 60% of the open-ended responses relate to just those things. And it's also followed here by carbon reduction as well, information on carbon reduction. So to this point, I've focused a lot on what farmers had in common and accumulating those numbers, but I want to go back to what farmers disagreed on, or some of the disparity between different farmer types, small organic farms and large conventional farmers. And I want to point out that this isn't to compare the benefits or between organic farming or conventional farming, but just to show the complexity and trying to find policies that make everyone happy. Because here, small organic farmers were more interested in policy for local distribution. And alternatively, the conventional farmer was a lot more interested in insurances. And this may reflect the business style of both farmers. Conventional farmers may export a lot of their foods, and likewise, small organic farmers may not have enough capacity or land or labor forces to where insurance makes a big difference on their farm. But more importantly, I wanted to show the disparity between these groups because we do have a small sample size here. And Pajaro Valley, in the context of the state or even the country, is a small region. But to have this sort of disparity in such a small sample can speak to the complexity and diversity of assessing multiple communities over the whole entire state, or not to mention the nation or globally. And so it stresses the need for community-based planning because there's already a difference in how farmers view it within their own community. And now Ahtziri will go into more of the overlapping concerns between the community survey and the farmer survey.
An overlapping concern between farm workers and community members was heat. Heat presents an issue in crop production for farmers and health concerns for farm workers. Both parties were also concerned about increased heat leading to work stoppages that would impact them financially. There was shared concern over water, such as drought affecting crop production and water contamination. Also, everyone just had overall concerns about the future of our planet and how it will look like for future generations. Next slide. Overlapping interest in initiatives include having access to local food that doesn't use harmful chemicals. There was interest in having better measures that protect the health of farm workers. And people were also interested in having work stability. By work stability, we mean having better working conditions for people and also providing pay when they have to return home due to not being able to work due to extreme weather conditions. As mentioned earlier, not only do people want there to be education focused on how to change one's behavior in order for these initiatives to be successful, but they also want to have leadership. They want to be able to look up to someone who has already done something similar and can help guide them. And after looking at the results from both surveys, future areas of research that we think should happen are finding out the thresholds for heat-related illness in a coastal climate like ours, seeing how has climate change affected the health of people locally, gathering the perspectives of more farmers, and also researching models of adaptation, planning in agricultural communities, and seeing what are the possibilities to support farmers and farm workers financially during work stoppages. Initiatives that we would like to look into are looking at the possibility of increasing local food distribution and how we can make our water more efficient for both farmers and members of the community. After looking at the data, it is clear that people all are aware of the changes happening because they are living through them. They want to see action, but they also want to have some sort of leadership to help guide them. With that being said, we would like to thank everyone for your interest and attention during this presentation. We are currently working on a paper that goes more in depth about the results of the farmer survey. So if you would like to read it once it is completed, please contact Dr. Victoria Derr, whose email address is at the bottom of the slide, and she'll be more than happy to send you a copy. Also, if you yourself are a farmer or know of a farmer that may be interested in participating in the survey, please reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to set something up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahtziri and Christopher and Dr. Victoria Derr. Again, if you guys would like more of that information, you can reach out to Professor Derr. And you can also find our previous surveys on Regeneración's website.